My name is Veda, I'm 28, and I can still feel the chill from my mother's words that shattered our family at that Christmas dinner. You no longer exist to me, she uttered, her voice holding more ice than the December frost outside. A dead silence fell over the table. All the guests stared at their plates, and my heart seemed to skip a beat. It was on that evening that I made a decision that changed absolutely everything. I walked away, severing every single thread that connected us. The consequences of my departure were a shock not only to her but to everyone who knew our family. But before I tell you what happened on that fateful night, write in the comments which city you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe. Northwood was the perfect stage for my mother, Caroline. In this town, where every step became public knowledge, she honed her main art, creating the illusion of a perfect family. Happiness was secondary, the flawless facade was paramount. She conducted our lives, from the bows on our shoes to the choice of summer camp, and in this orchestra, I was always the false note. Her voice was a constant refrain in my head, sit up straight, Veda. Behave yourself, Veda. Why can't you be like your sister, Veda? This chorus of reproaches became the soundtrack of my childhood, convincing me daily of my own inadequacy. The warmth of my father, Robert, was helpless. His sympathy was shown only in short, stolen glances at dinner when another of my mother's tirades was unleashed on me. He never spoke up in my defense. His only comfort were the words whispered afterward, "Your mother just wants what's best for you." But her best was synonymous with perfect, and I, to her deepest disappointment, was a living, imperfect human being. My sister Chloe, who was just 2 years younger, seemed crafted from the mold of our mother's expectations. She was the epitome of perfection, flawless piano playing, a report card with all top marks, angelic obedience. Chloe was the mirror in which I always saw only my own flaws. "Notice the dignity with which Chloe sits at the table," my mother would remark, and her reproachful gaze would pierce my slumped back. At times, I felt like a foundling, an accidental mistake in the impeccably planned universe of our family. In a desperate chase for her approval, I went through all the circles of childhood hell. I tortured myself in ballet classes, hating every minute. I filled notebooks, trying to perfect my handwriting. I obediently wore the ridiculous ruffles and bows she chose, enduring the ridicule of my peers. But all my suffering was in vain. Every achievement of mine was invariably shattered by her signature phrase, uttered with that icy sigh I had learned to fear, "You could have done better, Veda." The chasm between us became especially noticeable when, at 14, I committed what she considered a serious offense. I developed my own opinion. My desire to write for the school newspaper, rather than honing my public speaking skills in the debate club, was met with clear disapproval. "Journalism?" she said. "That's not serious, Veda. You should strive for more in life, like lawyers do." And the pink streaks in my hair were a real catastrophe for her. After that, she didn't speak to me for a week, and then insisted I fix it at her salon, at my own expense. Attending the state university, a 3-hour drive away, was a breath of fresh air for me. The distance turned weekly visits into monthly ones, and then eventually reduced them to rare meetings on major holidays. It was there, away from her constant control, that I took the main step. I secretly changed my major from law to journalism, presenting my mother with a done deal. The phone call when she found out was very stormy. It left my roommate in complete bewilderment and me in tears. But that time, for the first time, I found the strength to stand my ground. "You're ruining your potential," she said. "We won't pay for this decision." But my father found a way to support me. He secretly continued to help with tuition, sending a short message, "Just try to study well, kiddo. That's what matters." After graduating, I seemed to take a step backward. Against all expectations, I became a reporter at the local newspaper, the Northwood Chronicle. It wasn't my dream job, but the position offered invaluable experience, and my student loans left me no choice. Moving to a big city was out of the question. So I found myself back within my mother's reach. This meant mandatory Sunday dinners and an endless stream of messages with links to job openings at law firms, with low requirements. It was on one of these assignments, covering a city festival for the newspaper, that I met Ryan. He was filming a report on the event. He was an independent videographer. Tall, with a gaze that shone with genuine kindness, and a quiet confidence in every move. We started talking, and from that meeting, everything began. With him, for the first time in my life, I felt I didn't have to pretend. I was seen and accepted for who I really was. The introduction to my parents was a predictable disaster. It took my mother one look at his tattoos and one mention of him being a freelancer to deliver her verdict: not suitable. He has no stability, Veda, she declared to me on the phone that same evening. You need a man who can take care of you. The argument that I had been taking care of myself just fine for years was, as usual, ignored. The autumn holidays gave way to winter, and with each passing day, the tension between my mother and me became more palpable. Almost every conversation we had turned into a veiled attack on my relationship with Ryan. The air in the house grew thick with unspoken reproaches. I couldn't have imagined then that the approaching Christmas would not just be another trial, but the very point of no return that would change our lives forever. With the arrival of December, a familiar, dreary feeling washed over me. In the Addams household, Christmas was never a time of miracles and warmth. It was an annual theatrical performance, directed by my mother. During this month, she transformed into a true dictator of perfectionism, personally controlling every detail, from the angle at which an ornament hung to the shade of the dresses we had to wear for the perfect family portrait. By the way, dear, you're Ryan. Will he be joining us for Christmas? My mother's voice sounded deliberately polite, but I knew that tone. It was the prelude to an argument. Yes, Mom, I was planning to invite him. He doesn't have any relatives here, I replied, trying to keep my voice from trembling. Silence hung on the other end of the line. Veda, you know that Christmas is a very family-oriented holiday. Our traditions. He's a part of my life, Mom. I want him to be there. I squeezed the phone tighter, as if it could give me strength. Well, if you insist. Bring your videographer friend, she said with an intonation that made the words sound like a curse. Just make sure he looks presentable. No faded jeans and those rough boots of his. After hanging up, I sat on the couch, trying to calm down. My heart was still pounding. Ryan found me in that state. He silently hugged me, kissed the top of my head, and quietly asked, "Was that her?" "She'll try to ruin the evening for us," I whispered. "You don't have to endure this. I'll understand if you refuse." He looked me straight in the eyes, his gaze firm and confident. "I won't leave you alone with her. We're a team, right?" The pre-holiday rush had taken over the shopping mall, which was full of hurried shoppers. My gaze fell on a cashmere sweater in a display window, the very one my mother had casually mentioned last week. My budget, especially after a recent car repair, was against such a purchase, but I ignored common sense. I knew the unwritten rules: a gift below a certain price point would be seen not as a sign of affection, but as further proof of my failure. For my father, I found a rare vintage fountain pen. For Chloe, an expensive leather journal and pen set she had talked about. Ryan was by my side, and his calm presence helped me cope with the stress. He gently dissuaded me from unnecessary expenses. "Your worth isn't measured by the cost of gifts, Veda," he quietly reminded me. In the evening, as I was wrapping the gifts, Chloe called. "Be ready, Mom is very unhappy that Ryan is coming," she warned. "Maybe you could come alone this time? For the sake of peace in the family during the holiday." Why does peace in the family always depend only on my concessions? Why can't she ever meet me halfway? I asked, feeling irritation boil up inside me. "Because that's Mom," Chloe said simply. "You know her. Are you sure it's worth escalating the situation, especially at Christmas?" "Maybe," I answered so quietly that I surprised myself with the strength in that word. That evening, Ryan and I had a long conversation about family roles and the importance of being able to protect oneself. We sat at my small kitchen table, and he held my hands. "The way your mother behaves, it's not normal, Veda. You understand that, right?" His gaze was serious. Parents should be a support for their children, not constantly knock them down. I know, a whisper escaped me, and my eyes filled with tears. But she's still my mom. And you are an incredible, talented woman who deserves to be respected, he answered firmly. I will accept any decision you make about Christmas. But just know this, you have every right to protect your personal boundaries. On Christmas Eve, a message came from my mother that was more like a military order, a detailed schedule for the next day, including our exact arrival time and a list of dishes I was to bring. I dutifully started on the vegetable casserole, following her recipe down to the gram. With every measured spoonful of spice, I felt a dull resentment simmering within me. That night, I had a nightmare. I was a clay statue, and my mother was the sculptor. She circled me with her tools, mercilessly chipping and scraping away everything unnecessary, trying to turn me into the smooth, flawless, and faceless figure of her ideal. I woke up from my own scream. Ryan's hand immediately tightened on my shoulder, bringing me back to reality. Just a bad dream, I mumbled. But deep down, we both knew that wasn't true. It was my subconscious trying to process 29 years of living with the feeling that I would never be good enough. On Christmas morning, I stood in front of my wardrobe for a long time, contemplating an outfit that would give me confidence. In the end, I settled on a dark blue silk blouse and tailored black trousers, a compromise between the elegance my mother would appreciate and my own style. Ryan also made a concession, wearing a dark cashmere sweater over a collared shirt, but his small earring remained in his ear, a sign that he wasn't going to completely change for them. Ready? He asked, the car keys jingling in his hand. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders. As ready as I'll ever be. The main task is to stay calm and maintain our dignity. The drive to my parents' suburban home felt like a heavy ordeal. As Ryan turned onto the driveway, past the mockingly winking garlands on the neighbors' houses, I clutched the gift bags and the casserole dish as if for support. Remember, Ryan whispered, covering my hand with his before we got out of the car. The moment you say the word, we leave. Any second. The door was opened by my mother. Her smile was as flawless as a news anchor's, and just as fake, it didn't reach her eyes. She was wearing a long, dark green velvet dress, and an antique sapphire brooch, a family heirloom, shone on her shoulder. Her appraising gaze scanned my outfit and focused on Ryan with barely concealed disapproval. Merry Christmas, Mom, I said, performing the ritual kiss on the cheek. Veda, darling. And Ryan, what a surprise. She stepped aside, letting us in. Everyone's in the living room. Veda, your dish goes in the kitchen. The living room resembled the immaculate lobby of an expensive hotel. In the center stood a huge fir tree, decorated with cold, mathematical precision, only silver and icy blue ornaments, arranged in a strict order. Not a single sentimental trinket, not a single crookedly hung child's ornament defiled this monument to perfect taste. My father, seeing us, rose from his armchair, and his smile was the only source of genuine warmth in that room. My girl. Merry Christmas, sweetheart. His hug was firm and sincere. Then he turned to Ryan and warmly shook his hand. Glad to see you, son. Chloe sat on the sofa, straight as a rod, next to her boyfriend, Connor, a successful management consultant whom my mother adored. Hi, sis, she said quietly. Her eyes conveyed unspoken sympathy. The gift exchange ceremony took place in an atmosphere of theatrical joy. My mother put on a whole performance, admiring the cashmere sweater, but out of the corner of my eye, I caught her fingers searching for the brand label. My father was genuinely delighted with the antique fountain pen. Chloe politely thanked me for the leather journal. She accepted Ryan's gift, a bottle of expensive wine and handmade chocolates, with a barely perceptible, tight smile. Dinner is almost on the table, my mother announced in a commanding tone. Veda, come and help in the kitchen. Once we were alone, she immediately leaned over my casserole. The onions on top aren't crispy enough. Did you follow my recipe exactly? Yes, Mom, I lied, although I had actually used a less fatty sauce. She began to stir the gravy with unnecessary vigor. I see you've gained a little weight since Thanksgiving. It seems that newspaper job isn't very active. I remained silent, clenching my teeth, and mechanically arranged the rolls in the basket, in the exact order she considered the only correct one. We prepared the rest in icy silence until it was time to bring the dishes to the dining room. When we sat down at the table, I discovered that my mother had used her favorite tactical move. She had seated Ryan at the far end of the table, squeezed between my father and a tall candelabra with fir branches that almost completely hid him from view. This carefully planned gesture was clear to both of us, but Ryan just caught my eye and smiled faintly, letting me know that everything was fine. My father did his best to lighten the mood, maintaining light small talk. Veda has been publishing some really wonderful material lately, he said as we passed the dishes. I even cut out your article about the Historical Society. Great work. How lovely, Robert, my mother responded with zero enthusiasm. Although I still think Veda would have made a first-class lawyer. The Campbell's daughter, for example, just made partner at her firm, and she's only 32. Speaking of work, Ryan interjected gently. Veda's editor mentioned that she's being considered for a feature writer position. Her human interest stories are getting a huge response from readers. My mother's smile became like a thin crack in ice. How nice, she said through her teeth. Though I'm sure one can only dream of big paychecks in that field. The conversation smoothly shifted to more pleasant topics for my mother, Chloe's recent promotion and Connor's impressive investment portfolio. I aimlessly pushed my fork around my plate. My appetite had vanished after a few of my mother's barbs directed at me. So, you young people, what are your plans for the new year? My father made another obvious attempt to bring Ryan and me back into the conversation. Before I could come up with some neutral answer, Ryan covered my hand with his, a decisive and very public gesture. Actually, we've been discussing some very interesting options, he began in a steady voice. There's a media company in Boston that's very interested in Veda's work. Plus, they have connections to major publications I've long wanted to work with. The news fell into a silence as thick as fog. My mother, with exaggerated, slow precision, placed her fork on her plate. Boston? Her voice was deceptively quiet. That's another state, several hours away. It's a wonderful opportunity, Mom, I said, and the warmth of Ryan's hand in mine gave me courage. Nothing's decided yet, but we're seriously thinking about it. She repeated the word as if tasting something unpleasant. So now all your life plans depend on the wishes of this videographer? We make them together, I corrected, trying to make my voice sound firm. Because we are partners. Partners, she scoffed. You've known each other for less than a year. What about your family? Your duty to us? Mom, I'm 28 years old. My only duty is to build my own life. A life that conveniently takes you away from your family, after everything we've invested in you. Her voice began to rise. Ryan squeezed my hand reassuringly. Mrs. Adams, Veda loves you very much. This isn't an attempt to run away from family, but just a desire to seize an opportunity that simply doesn't exist in this town. When I need your opinion, I'll ask for it, she cut him off with an icy tone, before fixing her gaze on me again. This is exactly the kind of reckless, impulsive behavior I expected from you. First, you're journalism instead of law school, and now you're ready to run off to another city with a man with no real prospects. Mom, that's enough, I said, feeling my cheeks flush. No, it's not enough. Look at Chloe and Connor. They have a life plan. They have respectable professions. They understand what family duty is. She gestured towards my sister, who at that moment seemed to wish the earth would swallow her whole. Why can't you make just one sensible decision? Because they wouldn't be my decisions, I said, and my own voice surprised me with its firmness. They would be yours. My whole life has been built on your decisions. Don't you dare speak to me like that. Not in my house, and not on Christmas. I'm not speaking. I'm just calling things by their names. I will no longer build my life to meet your expectations. The air in the room became so thick it felt like you could cut it with a knife. My father cleared his throat. Caroline, maybe we shouldn't. Stay out of this, Robert, my mother interrupted him. It's high time she heard the truth. This teenage rebellion of hers has gone on for too long. She fixed me with her icy gaze. If you go to Boston with this man, you can't count on us. No support. No help when your plan fails miserably. We don't need your help, I said quietly. How ungrateful. She caught herself, visibly regaining her composure. And this is after everything we've invested in you? The education we paid for? All the opportunities we opened up for you? I appreciate all of that, Mom. But buying things doesn't give you the right to own my life. If you decide to do this, her voice trembled with suppressed rage, if you throw away everything we have built for you here, then for me, you no longer exist. Those words hung in the room, freezing everything around. No one moved. No one dared to breathe. My father stared at his empty plate. Chloe's eyes were wide with horror. Even Connor looked visibly uncomfortable. I slowly took my napkin and placed it on the table. Well, then, I guess there's nothing more to talk about. My voice was surprisingly steady, though everything inside was crumbling. I stood up. Ryan, let's go. He stood up in the same second. Thank you for dinner, he said calmly into the void. We silently headed to the hallway for our coats. I noticed my father flinch, as if about to stand up and follow us, but a single glance from my mother was enough to make him freeze in place. Right at the door, I turned back for a moment. Merry Christmas, my voice was a quiet echo in the deafening silence. And I closed the door behind us. We drove in complete silence, block after block. Only when the lights of my parents' house disappeared from view did the dam break. Tears streamed down my face, hot, burning, bringing with them the full weight of what had just happened. Shoo, I'm here, was all Ryan whispered. He pulled over to the side of the road and just held me tight. I'm here, with you. That night, I sat in my apartment, and the colorful lights of the garlands blinking in the window seemed like guests from another, happy universe. I took my phone and, finger by finger, methodically blocked their numbers. Then I opened my social media and deleted them from my life, one by one. It was the complete and final break that I had never thought possible. But somewhere deep down, I understood, it was inevitable and, perhaps, long overdue. The days between Christmas and New Year's passed in a haze of mixed feelings. Moments of relief from newfound freedom were replaced by bouts of deep sadness. The phone no longer rang, and this silence was both welcome and a little frightening. I understood it was the result of my actions, blocked numbers, not their respect for my boundaries. My body reacted almost immediately to the experience. My sleep became restless, filled with fragments of childhood memories. A constant tension appeared in my shoulder that wouldn't go away, no matter how much I tried. And in the mornings, I woke up with an unpleasant sensation in my jaw, which I was apparently clenching tightly in my sleep. Are you sure you want to completely cut off communication? Ryan asked gently that evening, massaging my shoulders. I'll support you either way. It's just a very serious step. I've spent my whole life trying to meet someone else's expectations, and it was very hard, I replied, wincing as he touched a particularly sore spot. It's as if I couldn't breathe freely for 29 years. And only now have I taken the first real breath. Ryan also faced his own difficulties. His parents, though they lived far away, were aware of our departure from the holiday dinner. My mom now thinks it was me who turned you against your family, he admitted with a slight smile after another call. It's hard for them to understand how unhealthy the atmosphere in your parents' house can be. No one will understand that, I said quietly. Unless they've experienced it themselves. It turned out that severing emotional ties was only half the battle. The practical side of a divorce from my family proved to be much more complicated. My phone number was part of their family plan, it was cheaper that way. My health insurance was based on my father's old connections. And, worst of all, my mother had a key to my apartment, just in case. Each of these threads that tied me to them required a careful and decisive cut. The gifts received this Christmas remained in the closet, wrapped in shiny paper. It was painful to look at them, but I couldn't bring myself to get rid of them. Instead, I found a bottle of designer perfume in the closet, my mother's gift from last year, which I had never touched. I took it back to the store. And with the store credit I received, I didn't buy a new trinket, but something much more important. I called a locksmith and had new locks installed on my front door. Chloe's birthday was on January 15th. All my life, I was the first one to wish her a happy birthday. But this year, the approach of this date caused me great anxiety. It was the first real test of my new boundaries, and I knew I had to withstand it for my own sake. Consistency was the key to independence. Her birthday came and went in silence. A couple of days later, I discovered a voicemail left from an unknown number. The block had been bypassed. It was Chloe. Her voice was full of reproach and disappointment. "I can't believe you didn't wish me a happy birthday, Veda. You upset me and our parents. Now I have to calm everyone down. Your actions seem very selfish. Please, call them and apologize before the situation gets any more complicated." I deleted her message without listening to the end. And then, without hesitation, I blocked that number too. Focusing on work became almost impossible. My thoughts constantly returned to the family drama, and it didn't go unnoticed. "Veda, is everything okay?" My editor asked after another meeting where I was obviously daydreaming. The last couple of reports were well written, but they lacked your usual spark. "I'm just dealing with some personal issues," I replied, not going into detail. "I'll be back on track soon." He nodded understandingly. "Take your time. Sometimes, to write well about other people's stories, you first need to sort out your own." His words, full of simple human warmth, almost made me cry right there. I had become so accustomed to constant reproaches that sincere, selfless support seemed alien to me, almost unreal. I involuntarily looked for a catch in his words, a second meaning that I might have missed. It was Ryan, seeing my state, who gently suggested the idea of talking to a professional. I found a specialist in family relationships, Dr. Albright, and made an appointment. Our very first meeting was a real revelation for me. I left her office completely drained, but at the same time, with an incredible sense of relief. It was as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. "What you're describing, Veda," she explained calmly, "is a textbook example of emotional control and manipulation attempts. Your desire to distance yourself is not a manifestation of selfishness. It's a healthy instinct for self-preservation." In mid-January, a thick lavender-colored envelope appeared in my mail. I immediately recognized it by the expensive paper and my mother's neat, calligraphic handwriting. The letter was 4 pages long and contained a mix of different approaches. There were lines reminiscent of a sense of duty, "After all we've done for you." There were mentions of my father's health that could cause concern. There were also discussions on the topic that the issue of inheritance may have to be reconsidered. But in this long letter, there was not a single apology. Not a single mention of the harsh words spoken at Christmas. Following Dr. Albright's advice, I decided to act constructively. I simply filed the letter in a folder labeled Family Correspondence, to maintain an objective perspective, as the doctor said. And, of course, I didn't write a single word in reply. Ryan decided to make New Year's Eve special. He surprised me by reserving a table at a small but very elegant restaurant with a panoramic view of the river. For this evening, I chose a special outfit, a short, sparkling sapphire-colored dress. I bought it precisely because I knew my mother would consider it the height of bad taste. Too bold, too bright, too loud. "To a new chapter," Ryan said as the clock struck midnight. Our champagne glasses met with a light clink, and outside the window, the night sky blossomed with the lights of fireworks. At that moment, I took a deep breath and felt something inside shift from a standstill. I was finally taking the pen to write the continuation of my own story myself. The first month after the breakup was like a roller coaster. Emotions threw me from side to side, from euphoria to despair. But gradually, towards the end of January, islands of silence began to appear in this chaos. Short, precious moments when I suddenly realized that I wasn't thinking about whether they would approve of my choice or not. I no longer felt the weight of her eternal condemnation. These were tiny victories, but for me, they were priceless. February brought an unexpected side effect of my break with my family. Freed from the eternal burden of my mother's disapproval, I felt an incredible surge of creative energy, as if a previously locked floodgate inside me had opened. This was immediately reflected in my work. My writing became deeper, more honest, it gained a nerve. My editor noticed the change almost immediately. "I don't know what's going on with you, Veda, but it's been good for your style," he said, handing me a fresh copy of the newspaper. "Your report on the community garden, it has soul. I'm submitting it for the Regional Journalism Awards." His praise was direct and sincere. It contained no hidden reproaches to which I had grown so accustomed. "It wasn't my mother's, not bad, but you could have done better, or, good, but why didn't you do it sooner?" It was a simple, pure acknowledgement of a job well done. My relationship with Ryan reached a new level. We seriously began planning our move to Boston, spending evenings researching neighborhoods, estimating budgets, and writing letters to potential employers. Without the constant voice of my mother's disapproval in my head, I was able, for the first time, to see our relationship for what it truly was, healthy, built on mutual support and harmony. "You know, you've started smiling more often," Ryan observed one day as we were busy in my tiny kitchen. "And it's not your old, polite smile. Now you smile for real, with your eyes." I froze, the spatula halfway to the pan. I guess for the first time in my life, I'm not playing someone else's role. And it's an incredible feeling, like I've finally stepped out from behind the curtain into the light. Other people began to appear in my life as well. I joined a club for aspiring writers that met in the evenings at our local bookstore. These new acquaintances were so easy and simple, as we were united by a common passion, not family obligations. I became especially close with Hannah, a yoga instructor who spoke in a quiet, soothing voice and always wore a scattering of crystals around her neck. My mother certainly would not have approved of such a choice of friend, which made our friendship even more valuable. "Family isn't those you're connected to by birth, but those who help you grow," she told me one day over a cup of coffee, after listening to my halting story. Kinship shouldn't be a cage. March brought with it a wind of change. Unexpectedly early, I received an official job offer from the Boston Media Collective, on terms that exceeded all my wildest expectations. Almost simultaneously, Ryan confirmed that he had arranged collaborations with 2 major Boston publications. All the details of our move, planned for May, were falling into place. Sensing that I was finally slipping from her influence, my mother launched a full-scale campaign to regain control. First, my aunt called, just to chat, with questions that were far too leading. Then, at the supermarket, I, completely by chance, ran into an old family friend, who immediately started a conversation about how worried everyone is about me. The climax was a call from our church pastor, whom my mother had obviously asked to remind me of the commandment to honor thy father and mother. But her tactics no longer worked. I met every attempt at intrusion with a polite but impenetrable wall. With Dr. Albright's help, I had prepared my responses in advance. "I very much appreciate your concern, but this is a private family matter, and I'm not prepared to discuss it. Thank you for your understanding." Every time I said this phrase and ended the conversation, I felt my resolve growing stronger. Toward the end of March, on an ordinary evening, a message from an unknown number appeared on my phone. Just a few words, "It's Dad. Just wanted to say I miss you, kiddo. Don't reply if you don't want to." These few simple words bypassed all my defenses, which neither my mother's tricks nor my sister's reproaches could breach. I put down the phone, and a single tear rolled down my cheek. A tear not for my mother, but for my father, whose quiet kindness was always lost in the shadow of his wife's strong character. At my next session with Dr. Albright, I silently handed her the phone with the open message. She read it and looked at me expectantly. "What would you like to do with this?" "A part of me really wants to reply to him," I confessed, looking out the window. "He never wished me any harm. He just couldn't stand up to her. I paused, choosing my words. But the thought that if I open this door even a millimeter, my mother will immediately use this opportunity to try and control everything again really scares me. Those are completely understandable and valid concerns, she agreed calmly. But it's important to remember that recovery is a process, not a straight line. The boundaries you need today might change in a year. Any decision you make now doesn't have to be final. You are in control of this process. That evening, I made a compromise. I didn't reply to the message. But I didn't delete it either. I saved my father's number and my contacts under the simple name Robert, separate from the list of blocked numbers that included the rest of my family. It was my small concession to the future. A tiny window left ajar, in case one day we could build something new. On my terms. April burst into my life, bringing not only spring warmth but also an intoxicating sense of freedom. I began to take small but important steps that had previously seemed unimaginable. First, I went to the hairdresser and, without hesitation, cut off my long hair, which my mother had always considered the epitome of femininity. Looking in the mirror at my new, bold bob, I saw not just a different hairstyle. I saw a woman who was no longer afraid to conform to someone else's standards. Then I filled out the application for my first passport. Ryan and I had planned a short trip to Montreal for my birthday. The very idea of traveling abroad, just for fun, something my mother would have called a waste of money, filled me with childish delight. This was my world, and I was finally going to see it. I found Jasmine, a friend from my early childhood, on social media. Our friendship had ended in our teenage years when my mother decided that Jasmine was unsuitable company. I wrote to her, awkwardly apologizing for having disappeared so suddenly many years ago. Her reply came almost immediately. She had become a successful graphic designer and laughed heartily at my apologies. "Don't even think about it," she wrote. "Some parents just can't stand it when their children's world stops revolving around them." Mine was exactly the same. I had to move to Chicago for 5 years for her to get it. Sometimes distance is the best medicine. For everyone. The first anniversary of my maternal grandfather's death was approaching, and this date brought with it a wave of unexpected, quiet grief. Grandpa Arthur was a good man, but always kept his distance. There was a certain coolness, a detachment in his kindness. It was now that I understood with painful clarity that he, like a mirror, reflected my mother's parenting style. He was the source from which she drew her ideas about parenthood. I thought for the first time about this relay of emotional restraint, passed down from generation to generation. About this heavy legacy of love that had to be constantly earned. One evening in late April, Ryan surprised me. It was a ring, not flashy and loud, but refined, unique, as if created especially for me. We were sitting on the riverbank, and the last rays of the sunset painted the water gold. It was in that moment that he asked me to be his wife. My yes came instantly, without a shadow of a doubt. But immediately after the wave of happiness, other, more complex feelings washed over me. Who would walk me down the aisle? Wouldn't the most important day of my life be marred by a gaping void where my family should have been sitting? Later, at home, Ryan just held me in his arms while I cried. These were tears not for the happiness I had found, but for what I had never had, a mother capable of simply smiling and being happy for her daughter. "We'll start our own traditions," he promised firmly. "Our children will grow up knowing for sure that they are loved. Just for being who they are." His words about future children, about little people who would never have to earn love, became the final, most compelling argument for me. I realized that breaking this vicious circle was more important than any temporary truce. More important than anything in the world. May was approaching, and with it, the day of our move. With each passing day, I felt my confidence in the decision I had made transform from a timid hope into an unshakable rock. And these changes were not just in my head. They were tangible, physical. I noticed that my shoulders had straightened, as if an invisible weight had been lifted from them. The chronic migraines that had plagued me for years receded and almost completely disappeared. Even my voice changed. It no longer broke into ingratiating, high notes whenever I needed to express my opinion or defend my decision. I was no longer a minor character in the drama written by my mother. Now I held the pen in my own hand. I was becoming the author. The author of my own life. For 6 months, I lived in the silence I had created for myself. But the fragile equilibrium was shattered at the most inopportune moment. I was in the middle of an interview with the principal of an elementary school when the secretary peeked into the office with an apologetic look. "Ms. Adams, you have a visitor." "A woman," she introduced herself as your mother and said it was urgent. A cold feeling washed over me. "Excuse me, I'll be right back," I told the principal, trying to keep my voice steady. In the lobby, among the displays of children's artwork, stood she. My mother. Elegant as always, but with a gaunt face and anxiety in her eyes. She looked me up and down, lingering on my new haircut. "Finally, Veda. I've been looking for you everywhere. It's time to stop this charade." Her voice echoed through the lobby, drawing attention. "Mom, please, not here." "I'm at work," I said very quietly, trying to maintain my composure. "Not here," she retorted. "Where else am I supposed to talk to you if you haven't answered my calls for 6 months? Your father is worried sick. This is all because of Boston, isn't it? We can solve everything if you just come home and act reasonably." I repeated that I was in an interview, but that only provoked her further. "Work, work. It's always work with you. Is it him who's put you up to this?" She said the last word with clear disapproval, referring to Ryan. "You've changed completely." I remained silent, which upset her even more. "Are you just going to stand there?" Her voice grew louder. "And ignore me after everything I've done for you?" The secretary, apparently, had discreetly called the school security guard. He approached us, radiating professional calm. "Ma'am, I must ask you to lower your voice or continue your conversation outside. This is an educational institution. Do you know who you're talking to?" "I'm a member of the hospital's board of trustees." "My husband." "Mom, don't," I interrupted her firmly. Then, turning to the guard, I said, "Sir, I apologize for this scene. This is my mother, but I wasn't expecting her here. I need to get back to my work." "You can't just throw me out the door like a stranger," she said with hurt in her voice. "Ma'am, you need to leave the building now," the guard repeated. "Otherwise, I'll have to escort you out." The expression of bewilderment and humiliation on my mother's face when she realized that her social status was powerless here would have been almost a victory if it hadn't looked so sad. Probably for the first time in her adult life, the perfect facade had cracked in public. "This isn't over, Veda," she threw over her shoulder as the guard politely directed her to the exit. "Families don't just disappear on your whim." I returned to the office, my hands trembling betrayingly, but I forced my voice to sound steady, apologizing again for the interruption. The principal showed tact. "Family is complicated. Take your time, compose yourself." That same evening, a call came from my father's private number. This time, I decided to answer. "Veda, I'm sorry for what happened today," he began, his voice tired and dejected. "Your mother was wrong to do that." "Yes, she was," I agreed. "Is she okay?" She looked very thin. He sighed deeply. "To be honest, not really. The doctor prescribed her medication for anxiety. A month ago, when the announcement of your engagement was printed in the local newspaper, she had a severe panic attack. A new wave of trouble came from Ryan's family. His mother called him, having heard echoes of the rumors being spread by my mother. My mother has found a way to justify herself in the eyes of her friends," Ryan said with a bitter smile after the call. "She's hinting in her club that you have a serious addiction. And that your conflict supposedly happened because you were trying to convince me to seek help." This slander was so shocking that I was at a loss for words at first. I can't believe she would go that far. "My parents don't believe it, not for a second," Ryan assured me. "But they thought you should know what version of events she's created." But that wasn't all. A few days later, when I was at the farmer's market, I met Mrs. Bennett, my former literature teacher who had always supported me. "Veda, I'm so glad to see you," she began, pulling me aside. "The thing is, at our book club, your mother, Caroline, was talking about you. And her story seemed strange to me. I decided it would be right to ask you myself." "And what did she say?" I asked, trying to remain calm. "She was saying that you are under the pressure of your boyfriend, and that he is trying to isolate you from your family. That you need support, but you don't accept it." In her eyes, I saw not curiosity, but warm concern. "I've known you since you were a teenager, Veda. You've always been a sensible and strong girl." Her trust was priceless to me. "Thank you for asking me," instead of just believing the rumors, I replied quietly, feeling tears well up in my eyes. "Unfortunately, not everyone is able to distinguish real love from the desire to control everything," she added simply, looking at me with warm sympathy. "And it always seemed to me that for your mother, this line is particularly blurry." In the evening, when Ryan came home with dinner, he found me at the kitchen table. I was sitting over a notebook, writing something very quickly. "What are you writing?" he asked, placing bags of food on the table. "It's a letter. From my mother. But I'll never send it," I explained, not looking up from the page. "It's an exercise that Dr. Albright recommended to help sort everything out." "And is it helping?" I thought for a second, putting down the pen. "You know, yes. Surprisingly, yes. All her actions, all her words, they're starting to form a single, understandable system. And for the first time, I see so clearly that it was never about me. Never was. I was just a convenient canvas onto which she projected all her fears and insecurities." Packing boxes for our move to Boston, I became more convinced of the correctness of my decision with each passing day. My mother's attempts to bring me back under her control only proved that the boundaries I had set were not a whim, but a vital necessity. And the support I received from the most unexpected people made it clear that I hadn't gone mad. From the outside, all the unhealthy dynamics of our family were as clear as day. Most importantly, I finally realized, standing up for myself is not cruelty. It's the path to healing. And that path is worth taking, no matter how difficult it may seem. A year. Exactly 1 year had passed since that Christmas dinner. I was sitting on the balcony of our new apartment in Boston, watching the last rays of the sun gild the skyscrapers downtown. These 12 months had contained more pain, growth, and discovery than all the previous 29 years. Our move was exactly the breath of fresh air we so desperately needed. My position at the Boston Media Collective had expanded. I was now overseeing their online projects. Ryan's career as a videographer had also taken off. His work appeared in several major national magazines. We had acquired a small but very warm circle of friends who knew us for who we were, not for who our families wanted us to be. "I can't believe it's been a year already," Ryan said, coming out onto the balcony with 2 cups of hot chocolate. He draped a warm blanket over my shoulders. "Sometimes it feels like it was yesterday," I admitted. "And sometimes, like it was in a past life. But the biggest changes always come unnoticed." A couple of months ago, my father called. His voice sounded in a way I had never heard before. It was a mix of shock and timid hope. "Your mother, she started seeing a psychotherapist," he said. "The doctor insisted after another panic attack." "Seriously? I don't believe it." The woman who had always called psychotherapy a fad for weaklings had sought help herself. It seemed like science fiction. The path was not easy, my father admitted. It didn't work out with the first specialist. Your mother left his office as soon as he dared to suggest that she might have control issues. But this new doctor, Dr. Winter, somehow miraculously got through to her. They've been working together every week, starting in August. I listened to him, but I didn't let myself be deceived. Bitter experience had taught me that in relationships with my mother, hope is a luxury that can be very costly. But then, subtle shifts began to occur. In September, on my birthday, I received a card. The signature was from both parents, but inside, in her familiar calligraphic handwriting, were a few lines that were different from anything she had written to me before. There were no hints, no reproaches. Just, "Happy birthday, Veda. I wish you happiness. Your favorite roses are blooming in the garden right now." It was a simple observation. A statement of fact. And in that simplicity, there was more warmth than in all her grand speeches for many years. The real moment of truth came in the first days of December. I again saw a familiar envelope in my mailbox with her perfect handwriting. But this time it was unusually thick. Inside was a 5-page letter, and its content was unlike anything she had ever written to me. "Dear Veda," it began. "I have sat down to write this letter dozens of times over several months. And I still don't know how to say this correctly, so I'll say it straight. I was wrong. Wrong not only on that Christmas evening a year ago, but in many, many other cases throughout your life. I had to stop after each paragraph to catch my breath. I couldn't believe what I was reading." She recalled specific, long-forgotten moments, how she criticized my drawing in the 8th grade, driving me to tears, how she devalued my first journalism award, how she pressured me with the choice of college, using money as leverage. She herself, in black and white, gave definitions to her behavior: controlling, dismissive, emotionally manipulative. "I am not asking for your forgiveness," was written further on. "I know I haven't earned it yet. But it's important for me that you know, I am trying to understand why I acted this way towards my own daughter. My psychotherapist is helping me see how the conditional love I received from my mother distorted my own idea of what it means to be a parent. This doesn't absolve me of guilt, but perhaps it explains something." At the end of the letter, there were no demands, no ultimatums, no expectations. "If you ever feel that you are ready for contact in any form, I will accept it on any of your terms. If that day never comes, I will understand and respect your decision." At our next video session, which by that time had become monthly, I read the letter aloud to Dr. Albright. She listened attentively. "These words show deep self-reflection and acceptance of responsibility," she noted when I finished. "If this is written sincerely, then it is a huge step forward. But how can I distinguish sincerity from another skillful manipulation?" I asked. "I've seen her remorse before. It never lasted long. Trust is not something that can be restored with words alone. It is rebuilt with actions, slowly, over time," Dr. Albright replied. "You don't need to make any global decisions right now. Just think about what one single, smallest step towards reconciliation might be, if you want to take it at all." After long conversations with Ryan, I decided on this step. I sent my mother a short email. In it, I confirmed that I had received her message and suggested we have a video call sometime after the New Year holidays. Her reply, which came a couple of hours later, was surprisingly restrained. She thanked me for my willingness to talk and did not press or ask for more. We began planning the wedding for the spring, and the question of my family's presence hung over us like a thundercloud. Should we invite them? Would my father be able to walk me down the aisle? Would my mother manage not to turn my most important day into a one-woman show, with herself in the leading role? "What do you want yourself?" Ryan asked one evening, as we were once again going over the guest list. "Forget about what's right and what's expected of you. What do you need for this day to be truly happy?" After long and painful deliberation, I understood what I wanted. I wanted to give them a chance. A chance for reconciliation, but only on my terms. I called my father and calmly laid out everything as it was. They were invited to the wedding, but at the slightest attempt at manipulation or playing on guilt, they would have to leave. And no, my father would not walk me down the aisle. I explained that for me, this ritual is a relic of the past, a symbol of the transfer of property, which I do not accept. This year had taught me to walk my own path. And I would walk this path to the altar myself. But the most important, most healing moment occurred during that January video call. Ryan sat next to me, his hand on mine, giving me strength. On the screen, I saw the woman who had been a storm and an authority for me all my life. Now she just looked tired. And older. "Thank you for finding the time," she began, and there was not a shadow of her former authoritativeness in her voice. "I missed you so much. At first, the conversation was stilted. We both chose our words carefully. But then I mentioned the wedding plans, and what I had so feared, and so hoped for, happened. My mother, out of habit, began to advise on which flowers would be best for the decorations, but suddenly, mid-sentence, she fell silent. She closed her eyes for a second, and then said, "I'm sorry. That's not my place at all. It's your day, your wedding. What flowers do you like?" It was just a moment. A short pause. One phrase. But it contained a whole universe. For the first time in my memory, she consciously relinquished the reins of control over my life. We ended the conversation, agreeing to call again next month. It didn't feel like a triumphant return. More like a cautious, first step on fragile ice towards something new. Something healthy. Now, looking back on this whole journey, I understand one simple thing. Sometimes what we take for a period is actually an ellipsis, after which a new chapter begins. Those words that my mother threw at me at the Christmas table, "You no longer exist to me," didn't actually kill me. They killed that desperate little girl inside me who was ready to do anything for her approval. They killed the unhealthy, dependent model of relationship in which I was suffocating. And from these ashes, something new and strong grew: self-respect, the ability to say no, and the courage to decide for myself what I am worth. For me to be truly born, that version of me that lived for my mother's expectations had to die. And, paradoxically, that version of my mother that lived for total control also had to die, so that the capacity for real, unconditional love could awaken in her. I realized that true healing is not about trying to forget the past or pretending that unpleasant moments don't exist. True healing is the wisdom drawn from difficult experiences. It's the ability to build personal boundaries not out of resentment, but out of self-respect, to protect yourself from new disappointments. It's a conscious look into the future and deciding who is on your path with you, and who is not. If my story resonates with you even a little, I want you to know, you are not obligated to sacrifice yourself to make someone else comfortable. The decision to step away from relationships that bring you distress is not a sign of weakness or selfishness. It is an act of self-care. And sometimes, it is this very distance that gives all parties the space in which everyone can grow. Have there been moments in your life when you had to make the difficult decision to distance yourself from loved ones for your own well-being? Have you faced misunderstanding from your family? If you have a similar experience and are willing to share it, I would be happy to read your story in the comments. If this story felt close to you, please support it with a like and subscribe to the channel. Here we will continue to share stories of personal growth and healing. Thank you for being with me on this difficult journey. And please, always remember, your value does not depend on someone else's opinion. It is inherent in you from the very beginning, and no one can take it away.